Hmm. It's a real cacophony of frogs there, Ben.
Yeah, it started off quite gentle, and then it sort of built and came in with a you know, a whole suite of them, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit intense, a little bit overwhelming. I'm just trying to get a clue here from what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about some American stuff,
Uh huh.
North American.
Uh huh.
Could this be a wood frog?
It's not. It's not a wood frog. Is that you're locking in your wood frog guess? I'm assuming with that, with such a definitive, is it a wood frog? You're right to go for something super common, or super well known. I know that there are probably people listening on the west coast of the US that will recognize this one. This is the Pacific tree frog, which is Pseudocris regilla. Lovely little frog found basically from California up to like British Columbia, I think, from what I've been reading. Classic frog noise, right? That is sort of quintessential. That I was reading about them on CaliforniaHerps.com, and on there they say that it's a frequent frog call used in the background of movies and things along those lines. So I think it is just probably where you went, wood frog. Like, you were barking along the very sort of correct line of thinking there of a very well-known, commonly heard species.
Still devastated though because I didn't get it right. But it's interesting you say it's a commonly used frog in the background of movies. I'm guessing those movies they're probably not just California-based movies, right? Because you get that quite a lot where you just get like the generic sound of an animal, which sound designer has thought sounded good.
The killer is eagles making red-tailed hawk sounds.
Yeah. Or you often get what are they called? Peacocks. Yeah.
Yes.
In like some like no matter where you jungle, which isn't.
I mean, to be fair with peacocks, they have been introduced in a lot of places.
True enough. Yes, but still, if you're trying to create like a nice South American rainforest, you don't just hear. It's not. It doesn't make sense.
And actually, mixed in some Pacific tree frogs and peacocks, and you're perfect. There you go.
Yeah, and so in anticipation of 28 years later coming out in June, which I'm very excited about, I've rewatched 28 Days Later and then subsequently 28 Weeks Later, getting Maya into zombie films because she's not big. She's not big on horror, but you know, like some of the like sort of more suspenseful horrors have kind of like drawn her in. So I was like, look, let's give these zombie movies a go. And she loved 28 Days Later because it is a masterpiece. 28 Weeks Later, I'd kind of forgotten how stupid that film gets at various points.
I've never seen 28 Weeks Later.
Have you not?
And I can't stand 28 Days Later.
Oh, really?
It makes my skin crawl, man. I love horror movies, but it's Danny Boyle's films, regardless of what they are. I don't know. They don't sit right with me. They're such uncomfortable watches for me.
Oh wow. Okay, interesting. What, because of the content or because of the like just because you don't like the way it's shot?
I don't know. I've never really worked it out because it's pretty much all of his films have an element that just make me recoil. Like they're well made. They're doing their job, but and I don't think it's necessarily a content thing because that it's some combination of stylistic choices and sort of, I don't know, pessimism in them or something. There's some bit that just catches me, some combo. So,
well, 28 Days Later is very dark, but yeah, Maya enjoyed it, but not so much 28 Weeks Later, and that wasn't done by Danny Boyle anyway, which is why it's just not as good. But he is doing 28 Years Later, so I'm going to go see it in the cinema with my bro and with Maya. It's going to be good. But yeah, the reason I went on that rant about it is because that film, there's a scene where this girl finds a body in 28 Weeks Later, and it's been there for a while, but it's in London, and when she turns it over, there's loads of cockroaches there, and I was like, sure, we don't really get cockroaches like that in the UK. Like, can we get cockroaches? They're not really common. I'm sure they're not native to here. Like, we don't really get cockroaches. Aren't a thing.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever seen
Anyway,
in this country.
Yeah, that's what made me think of it.
Right, it's the
anyway.
misplacement of animals in places they perhaps shouldn't be. A Pacific tree frog. Yeah, absolutely one of those examples.
Sometimes you can understand it, right? Because like snakes on a plane, yeah, okay, those are milk snakes, but they're actors. They're pretending to be venomous snakes.
Yeah,
They're
but some of them
snakes.
are called out as there are other things other than milk snakes in that movie that are still being treated.
There's all sorts.
One, the whole pheromone thing.
If you know,
there's a lot of. I don't know, man. There's places where I'd give benefit of the doubt. That's less one of them.
That film's garbage, honestly. It's just a whole film about the fact that snakes are scary. It's like, oh god, change the record. But yeah, let's. So it's still 3-2, Ben, in the frog call stakes.
Yep.
I'm winning still.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't get this one. So I didn't take this opportunity to pull ahead, despite what, quite a generous. What was it again? It wasn't a wood frog, it was the other one you said.
This time? Pacific tree frog. Yeah.
Pacific tree frog. There it is. There we go.
The top of California Herp says the advertisement call is the most well-known call of a frog or toad. So
wow.
If you want salt rubbed in the wound, then California Herps is the place to go.
I mean, that seems like a pretty California-centric way to look at things, guys.
I mean, it's California Herps, yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on. We're talking about slippery, slimy salamanders. We're talking about these slippery little customers again. So this is a paper by Brown, Sathe, Dudley, and Deban, 2022. Aerial maneuvering by plethodontid salamanders spanning an arboreality gradient, published in Journal of Experimental Biology. Plethodontid salamanders, lungless little freaks. My favourite family of salamanders.
What's your least favourite?
Whatever Japanese giant salamanders are in, disgusting. Disgusting. I love them.
So you've got them all ranked out. Japanese giant salamanders at the bottom. These little guys up the top. Okay, I hear you.
I don't know if I have a least favourite, to be honest with you. I like them all. Yeah, I can't. Also, I can't really think of any other salamander families off the top of my head. But this study takes place in the impressive redwood forests of North America. So we got these massive conifer trees, sequoias. They are up to 115 meters. That's 380 feet tall. And they're also thick. They can be 8.9 meters in diameter. That's nearly 30 feet. So, and that's a breast height. So, that's fat. That's a big tree. And consequently, they're really tall. They have these really thick branches. And what this means is that if you go up to the top or near the top, these big, thick branches and the corners where they meet the trunks, that is a massive area, massive surface area of basically flat land. And what that means is that leaves, other debris get caught in there. This forms this nice base of soil. And then these large mats of ferns can grow in that soil. So you end up with this moist, rich platform up in the trees, covered in plants. And this wonderful environment is where the wandering salamander calls home. So being so high up, they're obviously at risk of falling. And even if they survived a fall from like 80 meters, which I think is the highest they've been found, it'd be a big mission to get back up. And so,
I mean, they're not strategy. Massive salamanders. I would imagine climbing 80 meters up a tree, it's best to be avoided.
100%.
I think you're probably very vulnerable during that time too, right? You're probably going to meet other salamanders along the way that probably don't want you going past their little bit of tree turf. You've got numerous sort of things that probably, wouldn't mind a salamander snack along the way.
Yeah, salamanders are vicious to each other as well.
Yeah.
They can be really vicious. I don't know specifically about this species, but I see no reason why they wouldn't fight. And I guess that could be a reason why they've partly have this behavior as well, because they're battling at the top of trees and take a little tumble.
You want to mitigate, the cost of tumbling out of a tree.
Yeah, but these salamanders, they will also jump to avoid predators. So they will just straight up bail out of a tree canopy to avoid being eaten. And because they're doing all this falling, they've actually evolved an ability to glide. And so we covered this in a previous episode. If you chuck them off a tree, they can kind of direct themselves in the air, slowing their descent like sort of brave little skydiver salamanders.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly that. It's exactly the same, skydiving, spreading limbs sort of process, right? To gain some level of control as you tumble out of a redwood.
Absolutely. And there's a permanent canopy resident. So this is a canopy resident. It lives in the canopy, which is Anades vagrans, the wandering salamander. And this is kind of considered like a really arboreal salamander, probably the most arboreal of all salamanders, tree dwelling.
Cannot stand the ground.
It's like prehensile tail. And actually, there was a paper that came out like 2 weeks ago, discovered that these salamanders, right, because they've got really sticky toes that help them climb. And I don't know exactly the mechanism of the stick, but it's something to do with the surface of the toe. I think it's like almost wrinkled, kind of like ours, I guess. And
textured.
What they found was this is actually like they were doing a documentary about them, and they had like high speed, really macro footage of their feet, and you can see the blood supply to the toes. It's really cool. But what this camera person noticed was that just prior to the salamanders moving their feet off what they were climbing, their toes would suddenly become engorged with blood. And they've worked out that what's happening is that they're gripping. And then when they want to let go, they flood the toe with blood, which basically like makes it more bulbous.
Right, and
so
separates
any kind of like
the grooves, presumably, huh?
Yeah, any like recesses and grooves it's using to grip on are kind of like turned into a blob. And so there's this, and this was just a couple of weeks ago that they found this out, and it was all because they were filming a documentary, which is really cool. So yeah, I'll put the paper for that in the show notes.
Awesome.
Yeah, but this is Anades vagrans, the sort of wandering salamander is like the famous skydiving one. And then what they wanted to do in this study was kind of compare the skydiving abilities between the one which is known to be pro at it, and then they got a moderately arboreal salamander, which is ironically called the arboreal salamander, called Anades lugubris.
More like wannabe salamander.
Yeah, who do you think you are, mate? And then they had the marginally arboreal Anades flavipunctatus, aka the speckled black salamander. And then finally, and I think it was a bit unfair to include them really, but they wanted a contrast. So they've got the Ensatina eschultzii, aka the Ensatina. And this is a species which is just not really arboreal at all. It just, they just included it as a contrast. So it had to go in the skydiving chamber, despite the fact it never really had any chance of skydiving, which is hilarious.
I mean, you say no chance, but like, if it did skydive reasonably well, I mean, it would just suggest that these arboreal salamanders aren't perhaps anything special, and it's just salamanders in general that are special.
That's true. Maybe all salamanders are born with the ability inherently to skydive, which is what they were testing, Ben, and that's why they did it. So yeah, fair play for pointing that out. And so we watched some videos of them doing it. Have you got some videos queued up for us to?
I do. I highly recommend people track down this paper if you're listening to the audio only stuff. They have 3 videos in the sort of core of the paper. One of a particularly adept skydiving salamander, one of a salamander of, I would say, intermediate skydiving ability, and one of quite limited skydiving ability. And actually, the video is quite embarrassing on the part of the salamander. To be honest, it fails quite miserably.
So they basically just get let go, and it is like a little mini skydiving chamber. If you've seen those places where
it's a wind tunnel. It's a vertical wind tunnel, right? I think the air is blowing around 8 to 10 meters a second, something like that. I think was what they were running with, but reasonably standardized. So all the salamanders are experiencing the same effective falling speed, right?
What makes it funny for me is that they get let go in this chamber, and they're like, the ones that are good at it are sort of trying to duck and weave. They're sort of trying to direct themselves. The ones that are bad at it just do like a full backflip, flop onto the floor, boink into the sides. And the worst thing is, because there's air blowing over them, if they hit the floor, their ordeal's not over. They get lifted back into the air to go again. So some of them are just cartwheeling around.
They have a tough time. So basically, the crux of the finding It's the more up. So you described them in order of arboreality before, right? With vagrants being the most arboreal, and basically the ability to parachute, the sort of parachute duration, right, is perfectly following that pattern. With vagrants being the most adept parachuting salamander of the lot, the better glider, it appears. With
Yeah,
his classic skydiving pose.
Yeah, and they talk about why it's good for them to be able to skydive, because at the end of the day, if they fall off their perch, they can redirect back into the tree rather than falling all the way down to the ground. They can probably fall less far, but also they use it as a means to escape from predation. If something tries to attack them, they just yeet it off the branch. They're like, "See you later, mate. I'm away."
Deal with it later.
And they just land somewhere else. And what was interesting was that they can make mistakes, right? So when they jump to leave to do a skydive, if you will, if their foot slips or if their tail drags on the floor during takeoff, if it's not a clean jump, then they are more likely to flip over and have less control. Like, they need a good clean jump so that they sort of start steady. And one thing which was interesting about the wandering salamanders, which is this really arboreal one, is that they don't really jump quickly. They just kind of like plop off. There's not any like particular ferocious speedy jump. They just kind of like plop off. And I think that gives them the best stability. Yeah, they're just like good stability. Let it happen. And there was the kind of the gradient of skills that is expected, wasn't there, really? Like, the wandering salamander was the best. The other two were kind of intermediately good. Their flight times were sort of not bad. They were both quite similar. And then the old Ensatina, which just was never born for the skies. Just not very good at maintaining control.
They were, like you alluded to, I mean, it was kind of, they're there for a control. They're an important control. Their contribution to the findings is appreciated, but they never stood a chance if this was a competition.
No, yeah. But one other thing I thought was interesting was that some of them, a lot of these salamanders went through multiple trials where they were encouraged to jump many times. And what they found was that no individuals, they didn't measure this, but they found, they suspected via what they'd seen that none of them were getting better as time went on. So you can't teach a salamander to get better at skydiving. They are seemingly as good at skydiving as they can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's fair enough.
Yeah.
Each their own.
That is interesting, that there's, yeah. I wonder if there would be a way of setting it up that they could learn and become better. I don't know. Or whether it's just very innate. But certainly it seems like it's very innate, is from what they're saying, right?
Yeah. But yeah, there we go. Flying.
I think the other, before we move on, the other sort of neat thing that they compared is whether the sort of gliding, parachuting was sufficient to go from tree to tree.
Oh,
and they
yeah,
essentially
they had a cool
concluded
that
it wasn't sufficient to go from tree to tree, but it's perfectly sufficient for sort of navigating within one tree's crown. So, I can imagine if you would sort of tell me about these salamanders jump out of trees and they have quite adept gliders slowing their fall and manipulating, that conjures in my mind images of like Draco lizards and things along those lines that are moving tree to tree quite effectively. This isn't quite that level. These guys, they're looking very elegant doing it, but they don't really have that suite of specialized weirdo morphology to help them get that extra bit of distance. So they're good, but they're not Draco good.
No, they are. They're not. Yeah. I mean, they're an arboreal version of something which you'd think of as like really terrestrial. So they're doing their best.
Or like subterranean.
Yeah, subterranean. Yeah, they were never born. They were never
Salamander,
meant for the trees.
You just think the most ground-dwelling creature possible.
But yeah,
in my mind, anyway.
That's actually not the case, which is hilarious. And they have the whole prehensile tail and the blood toes and all this stuff. So yeah, credit
they're
to
remarkable.
Them.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to our species of the bye week? We're staying in the realm of salamander. Well, we're staying in the realm of amphibians.
Right.
We got another new frog species. So this is a paper by Parkin, Rowley, Elliott-Tate, Mahony, Sumner, Melville, Donnellan, 2024. Systematic assessment of the brown tree frog reveals 2 endemic species in South Australia, published in Zootaxa.
Amphibians
So
in
one of them
trees.
is actually, say again?
Amphibians in trees. It's
Amphibians
a
in
perfect segue.
trees
It's lovely.
again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a South Australian. It was a really widespread species called Litoria ewingii, which was known as the southern brown tree frog. Had a really wide range in southern Australia, but it's being split up here a little bit. And this group has actually been studied quite extensively because it's this model for amphibian hybridization. So,
Right.
like, I don't know about you, but I kind of always assume that amphibians and reptiles can hybridize. Like, if there are two closely related species and they have a contact zone, I just expect them to be able to interbreed. I just think it's probably happening. But apparently with these ones,
Yeah.
there's good evidence that there's actually like a bit of a block on it. So there's these two species of tree frogs, Litoria ewingii and Pare ewingii in south central Victoria in Australia. And they basically have really similar calls. They have really similar morphology. So you'd think they'd be able to communicate and probably like mate realistically.
Everything's going for them to be able to hybridize. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but despite the fact that they have this opportunity to mate together and they probably do bump into each other quite a lot, there's a lot of genetic incompatibility. So when they are artificially hybridized in the lab, basically between 67 and 100% of progeny have this thing called anophthalmia, which is a disorder of the head, essentially. And it means that they generally are developing without eyes. So if these two species interbreed,
wow,
the juveniles don't have eyes. And so that's why there's this sort of quite close contact zone, but not a lot of interbreeding goes on because they've evolved to have this kind of genetic impediment to interbreeding, which is kind of interesting. And the line where those two species meet is apparently moving southwards.
I feel like that's kind of a it knocks on that door of a key question of hybrids, right? Is whether the hybrids are sort of fitter or not fitter, or that plays a lot into whether they persist and how widely they can be found and things. So that it all makes sense, even if it's surprising in this exact case.
Yeah. But this research was led by the Australian Museum and using frog ID recordings, which I know Jodie Rowley is heavily involved with, who's a co-author on this paper. But yeah, I think the actual recordings from Citizen Science helped to describe this species, which is really, really cool and obviously a big accomplishment.
Do you have some of those recordings to play?
They made them. They put them on the internet, Ben, and so
love it.
I want to maintain a bit of
mystique.
Yeah, mystique. So this new species that's been described, they've called it Litoria sibilus, which means whistle or hiss. And Peter Hastwell uploaded this to Frog ID Australia, so thanks, Peter. And this is the sound of the species. Bear in mind, Ben, it's named after whistle or hiss. So broaden your horizons, expand your mind.
Yep.
There you go.
I can hear the whistliness to it.
Slightly whistly, isn't it? It's a nice name anyway. It's a really beautiful name. Litoria sibilus.
Yes, I can definitely hear the whistleness of it, actually. Yeah, I'm quite satisfied with that.
Yeah. And it's restricted to this Kangaroo Island in South Australia. So these are actually found on an island. They are only found there. They're endemic to the island. But it is a big island. It's Australia's third largest. And it's situated off the South Australian coast. And the habitat that these guys inhabit is kind of poorly known, but they've been recorded in forest and heathland and disturbed agricultural land. And actually, I think that quite a few of the recordings that have been made of this species on Frog ID Australia have come from sort of disturbed habitats. So there's this chance that they are sort of semi-able to cope with disturbance, which is obviously good. But yeah, nice frog. There's a picture of it there. They're quite grey, really, aren't they? They're sort of grey with
they're quite a sort of stony grey brown, I would suppose. So they've got quite sort of little bits of very light yellow highlights on their feet, which are quite nice. They've got what I would call a polite face, sort of a gentle smile to them. Quite a round tree frog. That they've got a nice sort of plumpness to them.
Lovely dinner guests, I would say. Yeah, very
Yeah.
polite.
Yeah. And they're only also they probably wouldn't eat all that much too. So they're 2.5, 3 centimeters SVL.
Yeah,
Polite, cool.
ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like them. I like the way they look.
They've got a
I'm a
nice
fan.
charm to them.
Yeah, I don't know if they have a common name, but it'll be some kind of.
They do have one listed in the paper as, I believe, Kangaroo Island tree frog is the suggested common name.
Hello, we like that.
Which,
that's great.
I mean, job done, right?
Yeah. What more could you want? Where is it from? What is it? And it's not naming a frog after a kangaroo, which I would disapprove of. But it
was an island presumably named after a kangaroo that the frog is now named after. So naming a frog after an island's okay.
Absolutely acceptable.
Yeah. But naming an island after a kangaroo?
I mean, I like kangaroos as much as the next guy, you know? Yeah, no, I don't have a problem with that. All right, awesome. Well, yeah, congratulations to these authors. And yeah, really nice paper, top-notch figures. Have you got any other business for this week, Ben?
I don't know. I think that's that. Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember what we covered with any other businesses in the past, but maybe we can do a sort of catch up at some point of stuff I've missed. But I think we're good. It's my very long way of saying that.
I started the outro because I got the sense that you
that I was going nowhere. Absolutely correct.
All right, well, yeah. I think all that remains to be said. Oh, yeah, you can get us on social media, herphighlights@gmail.com if you want to email us, Tom_E_major for Instagram, or @herp_highlights. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.